Hey Theo, come check out this cool video I took while I was kayaking here in Kodiak.
What is that? Whoa.
Whoa, that was pretty cool, huh? That big humpback whale. What do you think a humpback whale eats?
Food.
Food?
Yeah.
What kind of food? Any idea?
Krill?
Krill, that's a good guess. They're pretty small, those krill. Something that big eats tiny stuff. Wow. Well, that's what we're gonna learn about today in the Ocean Science Discovery Lab. What eats what in the ocean? Have you heard of food chains or food webs, Theo?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think they are?
Like similar, like animal from the, what's animals at the bottom that has more chance of getting eaten and the top has less chance of being eaten.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it. So when we think about a chain, it's like a link, a bunch of links connected together. And in a food chain, at the very beginning, that very first link, we always start with plants. And then that second link is an animal that eats those plants. Can you think of an example of what that would be? Like think of a plant. Like, okay, let's say grass. What animal eats grass?
Cow.
Cow. Okay, cow eats grass. And then something else would eat that cow, maybe a bigger animal.
Lion.
Well, a lion, if lion and cows are in the same place. Here in Kodiak, we have cows that graze. Bears, yeah, bears would come and eat the cow. So then the bear would be the next link in the food chain. So now we have a chain. And a web is how, food web is how all these different food chains connect to each other. So today we're going to be thinking about food chains in the ocean, in the marine environment. We're going to be looking at all different kinds of ocean organisms and thinking about where they fit in a food chain. And each time we look at an organism, we're going to think, what does it eat and what eats it? And that will help us figure out where it goes in the food chain. I'm scientist Sarah, and this is my son and trusty helper,
Theo Hanold.
and we'll be taking you through the Ocean Science Discovery Lab today, learning about marine food webs. So we're starting at the very first link of the food chain. That's called trophic level 1. Trophic level is just a name for the spot in the food chain. So we start at number 1, trophic level 1. That was, do you remember what was at the beginning of the food chain?
Grass.
Grass, plants, any kind of plants are at the beginning. Now let's take a quick look at the globe here. We see the earth with the water, which is in black, the oceans, and land. What do you think, Theo? Is the earth covered with water, or mostly land?
Probably water.
Water. Any idea of how much water, like percentage-wise?
70?
That's really good. Yeah, something like 71% of the globe is covered in oceans.
70, because in the book it said 70.
Yep. Some people say 70, some people say 75, something in there. So on land, we're familiar with land plants. What kind of plants are on land, Theo?
Grass, trees, flowers.
Flowers, bushes. What do they need to grow?
Sun.
Sun, yep.
Water, soil.
Water, that's good. And the third thing, soil, you said. Yep, in soil are the nutrients that the plants need to grow. So plants, right, they don't have mouths that eat food, but they eat these things to grow. They need the sun, the water, and the nutrients in the soil. So just like plants on land, plants in the ocean need the same things. So let's think about plants in the ocean. What kind of plants in the ocean do you know?
Plankton?
There's plankton, yeah. Those are the plants
Seaweed?
Yep, seaweed.
Kelp?
Kelp is a kind of seaweed. So seaweed we see, where do we see seaweed?
On the beach.
On the beach, yeah. A lot of times you see it washed up on the beach where it's dead because it's been pushed up there by the waves from a storm. When it's alive, we see it growing in the tide pools, on the rocks.
You're kayaking?
Yeah, if you're kayaking out on the water or in a boat, and you see the kelp fronds on the surface. You see seaweed there. The plankton you mentioned are called phytoplankton, and those are the tiny, tiny little plants that we can't see with our naked eye. We need a microscope to see the phytoplankton. So what were the 3 things the plants need to grow again? Sun, water,
soil.
Soil. So in the ocean, well, the plants, the seaweed and the phytoplankton get the sun. In order to get the most sun, they need to be fairly shallow. So right up near the coast is where you find seaweed. Because if they were far out in the ocean where it's deep, that would be dark and they wouldn't get any sunlight or very little. The phytoplankton, well, they float around, and they float around in that top layer of ocean water, so they can be closest to the sunlight to get the most sun. What do all plants produce and put into the air that's really important for life on this planet?
Oxygen?
Oxygen, yeah. All plants produce oxygen. Do you think more plants on land produce the most oxygen, or the plants in the ocean produce the most oxygen?
Land?
Land?
Yeah.
It's actually those plants in the ocean. The phytoplankton and seaweed produce the most oxygen on the planet. Anywhere between like 60 to 80% even of the oxygen on our planet is produced by the plants in the ocean. Wow, we couldn't survive without those ocean plants. And they also do something really cool, plants both on land and ocean. They take in carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide we hear a lot about because of climate change. There's getting too much of it in our atmosphere. So the plants help absorb that from our atmosphere. So yet another reason to take care of our oceans is all those plants in there do really important things for us. So let's take a look at our seaweeds. Let's take a look at some of the seaweed we find around Kodiak. Scientists group seaweed by color. So we've got red seaweed, we've got green seaweed, and brown seaweed. Theo, take a look at these. What color do you think this one is?
Brown.
Brown, yep. What about these guys?
Green.
Green, very good, and
red.
Red, right. Look at these different types, Theo. You can touch them. You can tell the kids watching what this stuff feels like. We've got a couple different types. This one's commonly called sea lettuce. People like to eat it. Ooh, there's this hairy kind. You can see this kind of growing on mats in the tide pools, and the sea lettuce you find in tide pools too. What's different about this one?
It's kind of slimy.
Slimy, yeah.
And flat.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of smooth.
Flat, yep. How about, let's take a look at our red seaweed here. We've got this really kind of feathery looking one. And we've got, whoa, look at this one. This one's
Brown.
Flat. How do these feel? These must feel a bit different. They feel different to me.
This feels different.
Yeah. How does it feel?
Okay. A little smooth.
Smooth, uh-huh.
And maybe a little bumpy.
Oh yeah, a little bumpy maybe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of feels weird. This one feels kind of feathery.
Feathery, yeah, it looks feathery.
Yeah, like ferns kind of.
Like a fern.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we've got our bowl of brown seaweed here. This bowl is filled up with just one kind. Let's lift it up.
This is really slimy.
Oh, slimy, yeah. There you go. And then I've got a bowl here. Often we find seaweed washed up and it's dry and kind of crunchy. But once it gets in the water, it gets all flexible again. So this one's called rockweed, and you often see it growing in the shallow tide pools. And you can see on the ends, they've got these kind of little pillows, air bladders. So some people call it popweed because when it dries out and you step on it, it goes pop, crunch. Now people can also eat these like popcorn if they roast them in their ovens. So we're talking about eating. What do you think eats seaweed, Theo? What might eat this stuff?
Sea urchins?
Sea urchins, right? Sea urchins especially love bull kelp. Now I don't have a bull kelp here to show you, but bull kelp makes those nice kelp forests all around the coast. And those sea urchins, boy, do they love to eat that bull kelp. So what else might eat seaweed?
Fish?
Fish could eat seaweed, yep. Any other ideas?
People?
People eat seaweed, yep. I know you like seaweed, I like seaweed. Often we eat it in sushi. Now, other things like snails, there's sea snails that eat seaweed. What else? Crabs even eat seaweed. So there's quite a lot of different organisms that eat seaweed or even live in it. I wanted to show you something cool about seaweed. See this bottom here?
Yeah.
This is the bottom of the seaweed. It would be growing like this. And this is called the holdfast. Now it looks kind of like roots, and this is how it holds on to, say my finger was a rock. It would hold on to the rock to keep from being washed away by the waves. Now bull kelp have big holdfasts because bull kelp are really tall and big, and these holdfasts make kind of like little apartment complexes for a lot of animals. Little snails live in them, little worms, little brittle stars, little crabs. They're a really safe place for small animals to hide. So let's see, we talked about what they eat. What are the three things plants need again?
Water, sun, and soil.
Yep, and so seaweeds take their nutrients just directly from the water. They don't have their roots in the sand like plants do, but instead absorb nutrients straight from the water. Now let's see, we're going to look at the little tiny plants next, the phytoplankton. So now we're going to look at the phytoplankton, those tiny, tiny plants that we can't see with our eye, but we need a microscope to view. Now there's all kinds of phytoplankton, lots of different types, and they even come in lots of different sizes, albeit tiny sizes. One very common kind is called a diatom, and they're cool because they make glass shells. Now I've got some pictures, just a few, to kind of give you an idea of all the different shapes they come in. They can make chains even. Sometimes they're round. What kind of shapes do these look like to you, Theo? Like this one kind of looks like a pizza slice. What do you think?
Like a comb.
A comb even, yeah. Now there's also dinoflagellates that are way smaller than the diatoms. They're tiny, tiny, and they have little tails that help them swim through the water. So Theo is going to look at a dinoflagellate under the microscope in just a minute. I'll show you what we would do to look at phytoplankton under the microscope. We'd get ourselves a glass microscope slide, and we put some seawater in a little dish, get a pipette, and put just a tiny drop. And in that tiny drop, there can be lots of phytoplankton. And then we get ourselves like a cover slip, put it on, and that kind of smashes the water down, but it doesn't smash the phytoplankton. And then we put it on our microscope to view. Now, Theo's already got a slide up here that he's going to look at, and you guys are going to see some examples of phytoplankton that you can see through a microscope as well. You want to take a look, Theo?
Yeah.
So we know what phytoplankton eat or need to grow, right? What were those three things?
Water, sun, soil.
Yeah, soil. Well, soil in this case would be the nutrients from the water because phytoplankton don't have roots in the soil. They're just floating around in the ocean, drawing in nutrients around them. But what eats phytoplankton? These guys are small. What would eat something so small? Any ideas?
Plankton.
Zooplankton, very good. So there's plankton that are just a little bit bigger called zooplankton. Those are the animal plankton, the small animal plankton. And we're gonna take a look at those next. Here we are at trophic level 2, the zooplankton, the tiny animal plankton. Let's think about that word, zooplankton. Zoo is spelled Z-O-O, like zoo. What do we see in a zoo, Theo?
Animals?
Mm-hmm.
Like tigers, lions, zebras, giraffes, elephants.
Yeah, lots of animals. So zoo means animals. So zooplankton is animal plankton. Now plankton means drifters in the sea. That's actually what plankton means. Those are the animals that just drift with the currents. So phytoplankton are the plant plankton, zooplankton are the animal plankton. So zooplankton, let's think of some ideas. What would be a really small animal? Can you think of?
Plankton.
Well, yeah, plankton are small animals, but what makes up those plankton? Well, okay, I'll give you a hint here. So lots of baby fish. When fish have babies, they hatch out and are larvae, fish larvae. So those fish larvae are small. They're zooplankton.
Crab larvae?
Crab, yes, crabs have larvae. And what else has larvae? Octopus have larvae. And sea anemones and sea stars and sponges and urchins. Everybody has these tiny little larvae that are hungry and they're growing. So they eat what? What do the tiny animals eat?
Plankton.
Plankton, right, the phytoplankton. The tiny sea cucumbers, yeah. They make little larvae that are floating around, drifting in the ocean. Now, not all zooplankton, though, are baby animals. Some of them just don't get big. So we have things like krill, which are tiny shrimp, copepods and amphipods and euphausids and other little animals that just stay small and they drift around in the ocean. So we'll take a look here in our microscope. Theo's gonna look at some krill, which look like tiny shrimp, and then there's something in there called an arrowworm, and there's some crab larvae and some copepods. So plankton come in all different sizes, depending on whether they're an early life stage of something or maybe they're the full-grown krill. And then we'll think about, what do these guys eat? Well, we know they eat. What do they eat again? Phytoplankton, yeah, okay. So, and then what eats them? What do you think would eat a really small animal?
Zooplankton?
Like zooplankton, yeah, what eats the zooplankton? Anchovies, yeah, small fish. So small fish would eat zooplankton. And there's lots of other animals that eat zooplankton, and we'll talk about those next. Here we are looking at animals that are a little bit bigger, that we can see really easily, often fish or invertebrates. Invertebrate, what's that word, Theo? Do you know what invertebrate means?
Something with no backbone.
Something with no backbone, exactly. You and I have backbones.
We're vertebrates.
And we're vertebrates, right, because backbones are made up of vertebrae. And lots of animals that we're familiar with are dogs and cats, horses, the sea lions and whales. Those are all vertebrates because they have backbones. Fish have backbones too. But these guys that we're going to look at right here are called the invertebrates, no backbone, like crabs and sea stars and sea anemones. Octopuses, right? No backbone. So we're going to take a look at these animals and think about, what are 2 questions we're asking? What they eat and what eats them. So since we're over here, Theo, you've already got somebody. Let's look at this sea star. I'm gonna lift it up. We've got the sea star with its cool tube feet that help it walk and stick to rocks. Sometimes you can find sea stars in tide pools on a low tide. What might a sea star eat? Do you have any idea what sea stars eat? How about this one?
Algae?
Some sea stars do eat algae. This kind probably doesn't. This kind likes to eat things like clams and mussels. Probably would eat crabs too. They can be scavengers, or they can grab a hold of a clam and pry its shell open enough just to put its stomach inside that clam and eat it. So I use the word scavenger. A lot of animals in the ocean are scavengers, and that means they go around the bottom looking for like dead animals that they can eat up. That's scavenging. Now, who else do we have here? We have, who do you want to pick next? Whoa, hold with two hands. The sea cucumber.
Spiky.
It looks spiky, but it's really soft and squishy. Not bumpy at all. What do you think might eat a sea cucumber?
Otter?
An otter might eat a sea cucumber, and an otter could eat a sea star too.
And a sea urchin.
Yeah. What do you think a cucumber eats? Yeah, I know. It's kind of hard. Like, where's its mouth anyway? Hard to tell. So sea cucumbers, they kind of have little tentacles at one end, and they can use those tentacles to either capture zooplankton out of the water and eat that, or they can put them into the sediment and find little bits of debris to eat. So we're going to pick up that sea urchin. There we go, we've got that sea urchin. Let's find its mouth. Where's its mouth at? Right in the middle there. It's got 5 sharp teeth that like to eat what?
Algae.
Algae, right? Algae and kelp. Algae is just another word for seaweed or ocean plants. So they like to eat kelp is their favorite thing, bull kelp especially. And what do we know that eats this spiky guy?
Otter.
Otters like to eat sea urchins too. What else do we have? Want to pick this one up?
Snail.
Snail. That one's called a hairy triton. And that's a snail. So usually we think of snails as eating plants, and a lot of snails do eat plants in the ocean, the different algae growing on the rocks. This particular kind of snail, though, is called a predator. So that's an animal that preys on, eats other animals. So it would prey on smaller animals that it could find living in the ocean. Let's look over here. Now these guys, they're in shells too, but are they snails?
No.
No, they're not snails.
Crabs.
They are hermit crabs. You want to pick one up?
Yeah.
Okay.
This dude.
Yeah, we've got, oh, careful. Okay, we've got a big hermit crab.
Crazy.
And we've got a little hermit crab that likes to hide in the snail shells. Now they don't grow these shells.
He's scared.
They just use the shells of snails after the snails have died. Yeah, I bet it's scared. It's like, I want to be underwater. This one has all kinds of cool stuff stuck to it. It's a sponge and algae. You want to hold it?
Yeah.
It's called, oh, it's holding on to me.
How?
It's called a decorator crab because it decorates its shell with, ouch, all sorts of things that it can find as camouflage. So it's covered itself with sponges and seaweed to keep it from looking like a crab and more like, I don't know, a rock or something with stuff growing on it. So what do you think crabs eat in the ocean?
Algae.
They might eat algae, yep. Some of them eat algae. And any other ideas?
Small.
Yeah, they eat small animals. They're often scavengers going along the bottom, again looking for those small pieces of dead things that they can eat. They would also certainly like to eat live things that they can, when they come across them. They've got those nice sharp claws to grab a hold. So, okay, we know what they eat. Whoa, what eats crabs?
Otters, probably.
Otters, again. Boy, those otters, they like to eat a lot of stuff. Yep, otters eat crabs, fish eat crabs, other crabs eat crabs. Crabs are pretty tasty and lots of things like to eat them.
Crab.
Now in this final big tank, let me move that over here. Oh, we've got a couple of strange looking things. Now right here in the corner, here, why don't you come over here to look. So jingles are bivalves. We're familiar often with clams are called bivalves because they have 2 shells. So jingles have 2 shells and the animal is inside those 2 shells. And they are what's called filter feeders, which means they take the seawater in through their opening in their shell and into their body, and they filter out the plankton, the phytoplankton in the water, and they get their nutrition directly from that. So what might eat a jingle, Theo? Or maybe another kind of bivalve like a clam?
A fish? An otter?
Fish might have trouble opening up those shells.
Otter?
Otters like them, and those sea stars are very good at opening up shells. Now this last thing that looks like a white blob on a rock is actually a sea anemone. Now when anemones are scared or worried or just done eating, they pull all their tentacles inside and they look just kind of like a blob. Now this particular kind of anemone, when it decides to feed, it kind of stretches out and it has fine little tentacles at the top. It's called a plumose anemone or metridium. And you can find these in the water here, either white or kind of a peach colored. Now those fine tentacles are very good at catching plankton in the water and eating them. And they'll also eat larger things if they fall into their mouths, like bits of dead fish or something. Lots of anemones have bigger tentacles, which they can catch small crabs or fish swimming by. And what might eat an anemone? That doesn't look very tasty.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are some kinds of sea slugs that eat anemones, like nudibranchs. They're pretty cool because they take those stinging cells from the tentacles of anemones and they put them in their own bodies, in the gills, and that keeps other animals from eating the nudibranchs. All right, well, let me think about something here. There was one particular animal that we talked about that eats like just about everything here. What was that?
Otter.
An otter. So an otter would be at the next trophic level, right? Trophic level 4. So that's what we're going to look at next. Trophic level 4 and the marine mammals. Here we are at trophic level 4. Now we just talked about our sea otters being in trophic level 4 and that they are marine mammals. So marine mammals are in trophic level 4. Do you have some ideas, some examples of marine mammals, Theo, besides the sea otter?
Seal.
Seal, yes.
Whales and dolphins.
Whales and dolphins, yeah, those are all marine mammals. So how do marine mammals differ from fish? They both live in the ocean. What do you think are some differences between marine mammals and fish?
Marine mammals are bigger.
They're bigger.
And they have hair.
Ah, they have hair, very good.
And they're warmer. And they have live birth.
Okay, well let's talk about some of those things. The first one you brought up was they have hair, right? We know that the sea otters and seals and sea lions are all really furry. What do fish have on their scales, right? Now I know some of you out there are thinking, hey, but whales, they're not hairy. Well, whales, their ancestors used to live on land and have fur like other mammals. And after living in the ocean for a long time, they didn't need their fur anymore. They got blubber to stay warm.
I thought they had more.
They do. You're right. They have the hair follicles, the cells that make hair. So on whales, you can often see these hair follicles as bumps, often around their mouths. So what else? You brought up that they are warm-blooded. So yeah, marine mammals, like all mammals, are warm-blooded. Almost all fish are cold-blooded. There are a few warm-blooded fish, like tuna, exactly. Tuna have warm blood. Let's see, you said, what else?
Live birth.
Live birth. But what do fish do? They lay eggs. Fish have eggs. And those eggs, what do the babies inside the eggs eat? Those fish eggs. What's in an egg? Yolk, right? What about mammal babies? What do we eat?
Milk.
Milk, right. All mammal babies, including marine mammals, drink milk from their mothers. Now, there's another important difference between marine mammals and fish. It's how they breathe. Now, fish are underwater. What do they have on the side that they breathe with?
Gills.
Gills, right. Fish have gills. They absorb the oxygen in the water through their gills. Now, all marine mammals, whether it's a whale or sea lion or seal, breathe air, just like you and me. They have, what's inside of us that we use to breathe? Just lungs, exactly. We have lungs that help us breathe air. And one other thing to think about with whales and fish is the way their tails move. So a fish tail moves side to side like this when it swims. And a dolphin or a whale tail moves up and down like this. All right, let's talk some more about whales and how they eat, right? We're thinking about our two questions, what they eat and what eats them. So let's think about what whales eat. Now, whales come in two different groups based on how they eat. They can have teeth, or they can have baleen.
Baleen whales have teeth.
Right? And baleen whales, what's an example of a baleen whale? Humpback whales are baleen whales. Now, baleen is like this long stuff, kind of like a comb, tough comb-like stuff that hangs down from the top of a baleen whale's jaw. So as an example here, we have a piece of baleen here that comes from a bowhead whale. It's kind of hairy, huh? Does it feel hairy to you? Yeah. Now, bowhead whales live farther north than Kodiak Island, and they swim through the water with their mouths open, gathering zooplankton out of the water and licking it off with their tongues and making a meal out. Now, around Kodiak Island, we have gray whales. We've got another piece of baleen here from a gray whale. Now, this looks very different, huh? Between this one and the bowhead whale. Yeah, how does that one feel? Grassy, yeah, it's much more dense and stiff. So the way gray whales feed is they dive down to the bottom, say like a sandy or silty bottom, and they take a big mouthful of that sediment, and they shoot it out through the baleen in their mouth. They squeeze it out and catch all the yummy things inside the baleen. Now, what would be in the sediment that's yummy to eat? Any ideas? Yeah, there could be some plankton, there could be copepods, there could be in the sand, there's also like worms and snails and maybe little bivalves. So that's what they eat. Now, the toothed whales, like Bailey the beluga whale. For those of you who have not watched the movie Finding Dory, Bailey is a beluga whale. So beluga whales have teeth, and what do you think they eat? Swimming around out there. I don't know about octopuses, but fish, yeah, they would eat fish. Well, there's a toothed whale very famous for eating giant squid, and it is called a sperm whale. And we actually have some teeth from the sperm whale. You want to come over here and look? Check these out. These are teeth from a sperm whale. And sperm whale eat fish also, but they're kind of famous for eating giant squid. All right, so we've got some other teeth here. What do you think these, who do you think those came from? Any guesses?
Is it a whale?
It's a toothed whale. They're often called killer whales.
So orcas?
Orcas, right. So orcas have very sharp teeth. Yep, sometimes we see them around Kodiak. And the ones we see around Kodiak, do you know what they eat, Theo?
Sea lions.
Yeah, the ones around Kodiak eat marine mammals like sea lions, seals, sea otters. There are also orcas that only eat fish like salmon, but they have nice sharp teeth for catching other animals.
And penguins.
Oh yeah, they can eat penguins too. We don't have any penguins here. Okay, so here we have, what do we have here, Theo? What is that? A vertebra, right? We were talking about vertebrates and invertebrates earlier. What was an invertebrate again?
Like an octopus and squid and something like that.
Right, the creatures with no backbones. So now we're looking at the creatures with backbones, the marine mammals. And this is a whale vertebra, right? Just one segment of the backbone. Now we have vertebra in our spines too. They're not that big. This is enormous. And this right here is the disc that goes in between the vertebrae. We're thinking these are from humpback whales. Oh. So next, we're going to look at some other marine mammals, the marine mammal parts, and figure out what they eat. And you're going to tell me what they are. Okay, Theo, I'm going to show you some different marine mammal skins and skulls, and I want to see if you can figure out who they belong to. How about this really soft one? I think this is Oswald, and who's Oswald? The otter, the sea otter. And sea otters have very, very soft fur. And this is Oswald, the otter's skull. You can see these nice sharp teeth. So we talked a lot about what sea otters eat, right? What were some of those things?
Snails, sisters, sea urchins, crabs, and some others.
Yeah, they eat a lot of sea cucumbers. They even eat fish. Yep, they eat all sorts of stuff. How about, let's come down here and look at this fur and skull. What do you think these are from?
Seal?
A seal, right, a harbor seal. We have harbor seals around here. So this is a harbor seal skin and a harbor seal skull. Now, this one doesn't have teeth. What do you think a harbor seal eats?
Fish?
Fish, yeah. What about, let's skip this one for a moment. Let's look over here. Let's check out this nice brown fur. And this really big skull. Sea lion, yeah, Steller sea lion. Those are the really big sea lions that we have here in Kodiak. With their really big teeth. Huh?
Is this its skull?
This is its skull, yeah. And a little bit of its fur. And what do you think the Steller sea lions eat?
Fish too.
Fish, yeah. They catch fish. So let's look at this funny looking one. What do you think this is?
Is it a dolphin?
A dolphin, wow, you got that really quick. It's actually a harbor porpoise, but porpoises are very closely related to dolphins. And porpoises, what do they eat?
Do they eat fish?
They eat fish too. So we talked about what they eat. What's our other question we ask us about figuring out Who eats them, right? We talked about the orcas eating sea otters and sea lions, seals, yeah. Yeah. What about that orca? Or even the bowhead whale or the gray whale? Who might eat shark? Yeah. A shark might eat a dead one. The sharks are a lot smaller. A person can hunt whales. Sometimes that happens. But what about animals in the ocean? Are there any animals in the ocean that would eat an orca? No, right. So that tells us then we've reached the end of our food chain for orca, or with, say, a humpback whale, because there's nothing that's going to eat them. So from here, we're going to have the director of the Ocean Science Discovery Lab, Switcar Dusterlo, tell you about how to take these food chains that we've looked at today and put them together into food.
Welcome to the summary of the Food Web unit. My name is Switcar Dusterlo. I'm the director of the Ocean Science Discovery Program. We started the program in 2008. And ever since, we have been bringing marine science content into classrooms in the Kodiak School District. Today, I'm going to summarize a little bit what you learned with Sarah and Theo earlier about the food web in the ocean. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some photographs and make a little food web on our whiteboard here behind me. And you can see that up here, there's a big sun up there. So everything starts with the sunlight. The sunlight gives our ocean food web the energy. At one of our stations, you learned about some organisms that need sunlight to grow. And there were seaweeds, and there were also those tiny algae, those phytoplankton that you looked at under the microscope. We'll start with a seaweed called the kelp today. I'll put the kelp up here, and the kelp needs nutrients and water and sunlight to grow. So now let's think about an organism that eats kelp. Some of you may have suggested a sea urchin, and I have the test or the shell of a sea urchin right here. When there's a kelp growing like this on the bottom of the ocean, the sea urchin will use its little jaws to gnaw on the kelp and eat that little stipe away until that kelp floats away. So sea urchins like to eat kelp. When you look at this sea urchin, there's a hole in it. Somebody ate it. There's a story with this sea urchin. One day I walked out into my backyard and suddenly a sea urchin, this sea urchin, fell on the grass right in front of me. And I looked up and there was a raven in the tree. And that raven had found the sea urchin probably on the beach, had eaten it, and the shell it carried around and dropped it in my backyard. So ravens like eating sea urchins. And now we have a little food chain. We have a raven that ate a sea urchin, which ate the kelp, which used the sunlight to grow. That's a very simple and very short food chain. Let's try another one. This time we're going to start with diatoms. Remember, diatoms and dinoflagellates were some of the kinds of phytoplankton in the ocean. So diatoms also use sunlight and nutrients to grow. Now there are organisms that love to eat diatoms. And you looked at those, or Theo looked at those under the microscope. We call those zooplankton. They are animals that live in the plankton, and they eat the phytoplankton, which are plants that live in the plankton. When you have an organism that only uses the sunlight to grow, we call these producers. Everything that eats either a producer or somebody else, some other animal, are called consumers. So we have here a first level consumer called a copepod. Copepods are small animals in the plankton, about the size of a grain of rice, and they are very common. And many things eat copepods. So one of the things that eats copepods is a barnacle. You've all probably seen barnacles on the beach. Usually they are up above the tide line. That is to avoid predators, and we'll talk about that in a moment. A barnacle is related to shrimp. It's a shrimp that basically glues its head to the bottom of a rock, or to a rock. And then it builds a house around itself, a strong shell, so it can't be eaten as easily. And then it sits in there and kicks its little legs into the current and catches the diatoms and the copepods out of the water. Guess what the next question is? Who eats a barnacle? Now, the reason that most barnacles live so far up out of the water, where during low tide they are actually falling dry, is to get away from their predators. And their strongest predator is the sea star. Sea stars cannot spend a lot of time outside of the water. They always need to be wet. That's because sea stars don't have blood. They use the ocean water actually instead of blood to get oxygen throughout their body. The way a sea star eats is by extruding a stomach into its prey, like a barnacle, a smaller one, of course. Then it digests the prey inside its own shell and then sucks that stomach back into its own body and uses the nutrients. So a sea star could eat barnacles. Now, there aren't a lot of animals that eat sea stars. Sea stars are not very nutritious. Sometimes we see seagulls kind of pecking on them, eating a little bit, but even they soon get disinterested. Sometimes sea otters will eat sea stars if they are desperate for food. So I have a sea otter here, and sea otters are hungry animals. They eat a lot of different things. They could eat a sea star. They could also, one of their favorite foods actually, are sea urchins. So I could also have my sea otter here. My sea otter could be the top of either one of these two food chains. So they kind of connect these two food chains. Let's try another one. And I will once again use the diatoms to start with. The diatoms that need sunlight to grow. And this time I'm going to use a different kind of plankton. This is called a krill. It's also a very common plankton. And something that eats copepods or krill and is very important and very common in our ocean is the herring. Herring are a small fish. Well, they get to about this size, but they start small, and they have a very high lipid content, which means they are very fat. You could think about them as the French fry of the ocean. A lot of things love to eat herring. One of the animals that likes to eat herring, and granted they can only eat them before they are fully grown, when they are kind of smaller, is a salmon. I have a silver salmon here. So salmon eat herring, which eat krill, which eat diatoms, which need sunlight and nutrients to grow. And who likes to eat salmon? So usually when there's a classroom here, a lot of kids say, I do, I do, I do. I like eating salmon. So that just shows us that the marine food webs is really important for people too. Another animal that also likes to eat salmon and sometimes competes with a salmon fisherman is a sea lion. Seals and sea lions, they love salmon. And here in Kodiak, the kids know very well another animal that lives on the land and depends on salmon, and that's the bear. We have the Kodiak brown bear here in Kodiak, and they love to eat salmon as well. So many animals depend on these food chains, on these ocean food chains. It's not just the herring that want to eat that plankton. When you're on the beach, you probably have seen bivalves, little mussels, blue mussels, that are also filtering the water and eating the diatoms. This is the last food chain I'm going to put up here. So blue mussels are closely related also to clams. I don't have a picture of a clam, but clams are important food for many animals, for people, for sea otters again, for a lot of fish. So lots of things. You might actually go back into this food chain. Fish eat the clams. One animal that eats mussels or clams is also a snail. This is a whelk, and a whelk is a predatory snail that can drill a little hole into the shell of a blue mussel and then eat that mussel. So I'm going to put the whelk right here. And what eats a whelk? Well, I have seen ravens pick up whelks and throw them onto the road to crack their shells and then eat them. I also know that crabs sometimes eat snails. So what I'm going to put up here is a picture of a king crab. Here I have a mold of a king crab. King crabs are very important commercially. People love eating king crabs. King crabs are very expensive to get, and they are considered a delicacy. Now, in the animal kingdom, of course, something that tastes good, a lot of animals like to eat too. And guess who likes to eat king crabs? Our sea otter. Sea otters eat lots of things. They love crabs. Our sea lion might eat a king crab. Our bear probably won't find one. People like king crabs. If the raven were ever to get one, it would eat that too. But another animal that really likes crabs is an octopus. My little octopus helper here. So octopus really like to eat crabs as well. And who likes to eat an octopus? Sea otters eat lots of things. They like octopus. Our sea lion might eat an octopus. A bear might eat an octopus if it ever got one. That's not very likely, but only if the octopus comes high up on the beach. So what you can see here is that many animals cross over from one food chain to another. And all these food chains are connected into a big food web. If a key animal, like for example the herring, were affected by some catastrophe, let's say a disease. After the Exxon Valdez oil spill back in 1989 in Prince William Sound, Alaska, the herring were affected by the oil and they became sick. And for several years, there were hardly any herring in Prince William Sound. So if you lose a key species like this, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the coho? What are they going to do? They will not find their prey. So they may have to go looking for something else to eat. And if they can't find enough other things to eat, there may be fewer coho salmon. If there are fewer coho salmon, the sea lions are going to have to look for something else to eat. And the bears are going to have to look for something else to eat. If they don't find much else, there will be fewer sea lions, fewer bears, or they have a harder time in the next year making their pups. On the other hand, the things that were eaten by the herring there are going to be more of these. So we'll have more zooplankton. So it works both ways. Now also, if we have fewer salmon, that's not good for us, right? For the salmon fishery, for the people. In summary, we can say that the marine food web is really important for everybody, for all the animals in the ocean, for some of the animals that are not in the ocean, like the bears and the ravens, and for the people. Thank you for listening, and I hope you had a lot of fun watching this video. Thank you.